Joining me to discuss the obesity crisis is GP and CEO of the Doncaster Local Medical Committee, Dr. Dean Eggitt. Dr. Dean, good evening. Thanks for joining us. It's always slightly off-putting to watch somebody like that because you know that while probably an awful lot of their problems are brought upon themselves, but you get to that point, you get to be that big, you know, it's a very difficult way to get any weight off at all, isn't it?
Yeah, there does become this point of no return where the weight causes so many other medical problems, including joint issues, movement issues, breathing issues, that it's quite hard to do any extra exercise that's going to work off some of those calories. And it really does come down to what you eat and how much you eat, which is mind over matter. But at that point, I suspect you've stopped thinking quite so straight. There's this really important point of cognitive load where when you're really unwell, you stop thinking quite straight and can't make the decisions that you and I might do.
Well, exactly right, because you don't get to be that fat, you don't get to be that big. You might say that 40% of people over 45 are obese, but to get as big as he is, you would have to be eating pretty much constantly, wouldn't you?
Yeah, so weight gain can be a very slow process where actually you might eat a brilliant diet of lots and lots of healthy things, but it only takes one extra apple a day or one small amount per day of a tiny bit of calories, and it soon adds up over a year. So it's very easy for the average person to put on weight, but to put on such extreme weight like Jason has, he has been eating ridiculous amounts of calories, which he himself admits to, which is actually the weight is a symptom of an underlying problem that's going on in his life, which sadly probably could have been nipped in the bud had he had that help somewhat earlier.
Yeah, and I mean, he's got his mother living there with him who is probably helping him to continue to eat the way that he does, because usually people like him, I mean, they can't get up and get to the fridge, so presumably somebody has to help him get the food that he puts inside him, and it's probably her.
It probably is, but imagine one of your loved ones sat there uncomfortable with their life, having challenges, saying, I'm starving, I'm hungry, help me. Would you sit there and say, well, no, actually, your life is challenging, but I'm not going to help you. I'm not going to give you the food that gives you the comfort
Well, I
when
don't
you're
think, I'll tell
struggling
you
with
what I
your life.
wouldn't do is I wouldn't go, I'll just go and order another 3 kebabs for you, you know.
Well, this problem of weight gain and obesity is very rarely one individual problem. It's a societal problem and a familial problem where when one individual is overweight or obese, it's likely that the entire family has issues with how they eat, the exercise that they do, and the other challenges in life that contribute to weight gain. So Jason, bless him, he's not on his own. He's probably got some family challenges here that's contributing to that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm not trying to demonise him. I just think that, you know, if you get to the point that he's at, you know, there must have been several areas and several places where he could have been prevented from getting quite as big as he is, but clearly that didn't happen. So I suppose you might say there's a failure somewhere along the line in the medical world, because looking at this report about the size of Britain, if you like, almost all of the worst areas for obesity are in the north of England. And in London, they have 10 of the slimmest authorities. So you'd have to assume there's a bit of a north-south divide thing going on here.
There is. Obesity is extraordinarily complex, and I'm going to hold my hand up here. I'm sat in Doncaster talking to you, and Doncaster is in the top 10 for England's obese areas. So I think approximately 75% of adults here are classed as overweight and obese, with around 1/3 of adults being definitely classed as obese. So these people are seriously unhealthy and need help. It's not just about living up north. You know, this is much more complex than geography of where you live, but it's about the support of where you live. Do you have access to high quality food? Do you have access to places where you can have active recreation? Can you go to the gym easily? Do you have to drive everywhere? And are you likely to get a good job that's going to pay well, that's going to help you buy decent food and live your life healthy? And like I said, there's this poverty tax of cognition where when you're busy worrying about your life, you stop worrying about food because you're busy worrying about other stuff. So actually the north-south divide is actually a poverty issue, which is a governmental issue. And I know you've spoken about this before, so I'll be interested to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, well, I think there's plenty of poor people in London, though. I mean, I live in London, and you know, it's not full of Russian oligarchs driving around in Rolls Royces. You know, I know that's kind of might be the perception. And similarly, I wouldn't imagine that all of Doncaster is riddled with people who can't, you know, scrape enough money together to buy some vegetables. So I think it's more than just money. I think maybe it's education, maybe it's something to do with attitudes, perhaps, I don't know. But I mean, there's certainly plenty of local authority money going into places like Doncaster and Liverpool and Leeds and Hull. You know, there's plenty of money being spent on, you know, making people aware that they should be eating better. I wonder whether it's more to do with the availability of food, because when I was younger, back in the 70s, you know, there wasn't fast food really to any great extent. There wasn't much food around. And I was very thin. I went to live in America, which suddenly was this utopia of eating, and which Britain has now become as well. You know, you walk into a petrol station and there's about 55 different versions of aero bars that you can buy on the way to pay for your petrol. It didn't used to be like that, and I just wonder if people just can't resist it.
You're absolutely right on every single one of those points. You know, 21st century society is that we're all working 24/7. We're all stressed 24/7. And we tend to grab the closest thing to us that's going to make us feel full and happy, even if it's unhealthy, except where you're more educated and you're not worrying about life and you have a little bit more time to say, is this the right thing for me to do? So there is this definite link between people who have challenges in their lives. And that's not just about poverty. That's also about age. That's about race. That's about geography of where you live. It might even be about your sex. It might even be about your sexual preference and sexual status. Anything that adds increased stress to your life is going to put a tax and a burden upon whether or not you want to concentrate on food and weight and healthiness. So people who live more stressful lives are going to be much more likely to be overweight and obese. That applies to London equally as it does to Doncaster. But you've got to admit, Doncaster's pretty resource poor compared to London. Hence, we have a greater rate of obesity.
Yeah. I mean, I went into a coffee shop for the first time in a long time this morning, and it shocked me how much it cost to actually have a cup of coffee and a Danish pastry for breakfast. £7. I was saying, sorry, are you having a laugh? So, I mean, I don't know where these poor people are getting all this fast food from, because it's not very cheap for a start. But let me ask you about the numbers of people, because NHS dealing with 3,000 fat-related admissions every single day. I mean, that's a huge number, 98 billion quid a year. Karen says this to us, it's absolutely shocking. Obese people should pay for their treatment and care. ST says, I'm a bit overweight, but identify as thin. Yeah, very funny. That's what we did. But is there some truth to what we say, that some people who get themselves into situations should not be getting sort of free treatment on the NHS, like this Wegovy drug, this Wegovy jab that people are asking for, including Jason, Britain's fattest man? Is that something that you would advocate for anyone, or just for sort of extreme circumstances?
No, actually, I advocate for access to this style of treatment, this drug for people who are overweight and obese for several reasons, really. Because, okay, let's pretend for a brief moment, let's entertain the concept that it's their fault. They overate, they were a bad person. Let's demonize them. Let's make them really, really bad. Should we say you couldn't have access to this drug? Well, actually, they are a burden to wider society in the sense that they can't work. They're going to require healthcare access. They're going to die early. They're going to need dialysis. They're going to need operations, all of which the taxpayer pays. So even if we're being completely selfish about this, which I should point out, I'm not, I'm just giving an extreme example, I would rather that person be healthy by me paying a tax, giving them the drug, helping them to get better, than having the burden of them being ill. I'd rather them be healthy and productive in society. So if I'm going to spend the cash, do I want to spend it on somebody being healthy and productive? Or do I want to spend it on somebody who is essentially dying slowly and I have to pay the costs for? Well, I want them to be happy, healthy and productive. That's where I want my money to go. So I'm very happy to use this drug on anybody who will benefit from it.
The trouble with that is, though, it tends to create a sort of a want-need society, doesn't it? Because it means that basically you're not responsible for anything you do, I'm not responsible for anything I do. If I get too fat, I'll just come to you and you'll give me some drugs to get thin. Then I can just go out and eat some more if I feel like it and get fat again. You'll give me some more drugs. A bit like, you know, rewarding the thief for stealing and saying, don't worry, you can just carry on stealing and we'll just keep paying for it.
Yeah, possibly so. But actually, another way to look at that is that we talked about those boroughs of London that are particularly wealthy, which don't really struggle so much with obesity. The likelihood of the people owning the businesses that's selling the fast food and selling the unhealthy chemicals, the drinks and the food to the people in the poorest areas who are getting unwell, it's likely that you're going to own the business if you live in London, and you're going to suffer from the business if you don't live in London. So we have this weird, perverse society anyway, which is extraordinarily capitalist, and we sell people goods that are going to kill them and make them poorly. Actually, if we're going to nip this in the bud, let's not look at the individual, and let's look at how we as a society sell chemicals and drugs to people that are going to make them unhealthy. Let's start pointing the fingers at people who put extra sugar in something to make it extra tasty to get people addicted to it. That's really where the problem lies. So if we're going to look at things like taxing and making things more expensive, let's not make something more expensive for the consumer. Let's make it more expensive for the producer.
Yeah. But we've done all that as well, and it hasn't worked. Listen, we can talk about this again because I think we need to, because there's a lot going on there. But I very much enjoyed it. Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Dean Eggitt from the local medical committee up there in Doncaster.